Good morning, friends. We are on chapter 41. Took over the OxyContin belt. Columbus, Ohio. Forget you had children. This advice was given to Mario, an illegal immigrant, by his new boss from Jalisco, Nayarit. Mario was preparing for what turned out to be a short career as a dispatcher for a black tar heroin cell in Columbus, Ohio, a few years after the man brought the drug there. Forget that people may do to your kids what you're doing to the children of others, his new boss told him in a restaurant one day. Otherwise you won't sleep. And, he added, don't let the clients die. Care for them. They're giving you money. Mario had worked for several years as a mechanic in Portland, Oregon. Many of his clients then were heroin runners in Portland from Jalisco, Nayarit, or villages nearby. He sold them 2 or 3 cars a week. They offered him work in their networks, which he declined at first. Then a series of financial problems made him reconsider, so one summer he accepted a job with the Jalisco man he called his boss, and they drove to Columbus. I spoke some English, I was clean, I had ID, good credit to rent an apartment. I rented one there, they paid the rent, he told me. He earned $500 a week as a dispatcher, taking telephone orders from a roster of users. The network sales grew to more than $2,000 a day. His boss returned to Nayarit and waited for workers like Mario to send the money home. Mario woke in his bare apartment each morning, took phone calls all day, directed the drivers, but rarely socialized with them. He hated needles, but he lived far from the effects of what he was selling. I never saw anyone inject himself, he said. I never saw people get sick from lack of dope. I never knew how people got sick. I never knew anything of the people who died. Had I known, I'd have left it. The drugs arrived regularly from Nayarit. It did not come in truckloads, as he imagined it would, like those on television shows. Rather, it came with couriers carrying a kilo or 2 at a time. Ant-like, he thought. His boss shipped it from Nayarit to Pomona, California, where it was cut up and sent in smaller quantities to Columbus and other cities. The boss hired workers from Jalisco, whose families he knew. So he knew the network would send its profits back to him every month. His boss himself had once worked as a runner in another network before going out on his own. He knew all the dealers and drivers in Columbus. Mario made trips with his boss to Nashville and Charlotte to arrange supply deals with other networks. He dispatched drivers around Columbus for 4 months until the day the police barged in and he went to prison. Nayarit doesn't have a cartel, he said. It's people acting as individuals who are doing it on their own, micro-entrepreneurs. They're always looking for where there's more money, places where there's no competition. There are thousands of small networks. Anyone can be a boss of a network. Because of that, the Jalisco boys had succeeded by the mid-2000s in avoiding virtually every town Americans traditionally associate with heroin. No Jalisco boy ventured to Baltimore, Philadelphia, or Detroit. No Nayarit sugarcane farm boy was going to shoot it out with armed heroin gangs in New York City. They didn't have to. Mid-sized metro areas had legions of new young customers and no worrisome gangs or mafias. The Jalisco boys' ranchero farm boy roots, an unbeatable retail system, led them to areas of least resistance, now tenderized to heroin by the widespread prescribing of legal opiate painkillers. They went, said one cop I met, and took over the OxyContin belt in America. The Jalisco boys, in fact, were hardly the country's only heroin dealers. Detroit, Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York had drug gangs who controlled the trade for years. Nor were the boys the only Mexicans trafficking black tar heroin. Northern California was controlled by traffickers from the Tierra Caliente, a humid and notoriously violent part of west central Mexico. No Jalisco boy ever stepped foot in Northern California. Sinaloans controlled the Chicago and the Atlanta markets, both of which were major distribution hubs. The boys for sure weren't going there. Yet all these gangs were known for their violence and gunplay. To me, that made them almost passé, like Wild West gunslingers. None of them controlled the drug from its production in Mexico to its sale by the 10th of a gram on streets across the United States. The Jalisco boys did. They were dope traffickers for a new age when marketing is king and even people are brands. Purdue branded OxyContin as the convenient solution to disruptive chronic pain patients. The Jalisco boys branded their system the safe and reliable delivery of balloons containing heroin of standardized weight and potency, the addict's convenient everyday solution, the one to start with and stay with. Like Purdue, but quite unlike traditional heroin dealers, the Jalisco boys didn't sit around waiting for customers to come to them. They targeted new ones using come-ons, price breaks. They followed up sales to good clients with phone calls that amounted to customer satisfaction surveys. Was the dope good? Was the driver polite? Drivers would travel across town to sell a $15 balloon. Addicts learned to play one crew off another. The other guy was giving me 7 balloons for $100. You're only giving me 6. The effect was to keep the addict not only using, but drumming up more customers to get bigger discounts. Meanwhile, Jalisco dealers were constantly monitoring good customers for signs that any of them were trying to quit. Those addicts got a phone call, then a driver plying them with free dope. One Albuquerque addict told me this story. He called his Jalisco dealer, whom he considered his friend, to say he was going into rehab. Good idea, the dealer said. This stuff's killing you. An hour later, the dealer was at the addict's door with free heroin. Now that you're quitting, the dealer said, here's a going-away present as a way of saying thanks for your business. The addict kept using. A woman in Columbus told me her dealer welcomed her home from jail with a care package of several balloons of tar heroin to get her using again. The more astute among the Jalisco travelers realized that they owed much of their success to prescription opiates. A few had heard of OxyContin. Most of the Jalisco boys I interviewed, though, had not. They were oblivious. They knew nothing of the history of heroin in America. They didn't know how their customers came to the drug, that they were now selling to a historically new clientele, customers no one expected to be using the drug. Why would they? They spoke no English and holed up in Spartan apartments when they weren't driving, and thus had little feel for the United States. They weren't sociologists. Most weren't about to converse with the addicts about how they got into dope. To them, the less face time with addicts, the better. They were quick-hit artists. They were selling well and didn't care why. But their delivery system and cold-blooded marketing, combined with an enormous and growing clientele newly addicted to pills, were the reason for their success. By the 2000s, these ranchero farm boys from a country of just 45,000 people, from a county of just 45,000 people, in a state most Americans couldn't find on a map, had become the most prolific single confederation of heroin traffickers in the United States, aggressively seeking new markets while supplying dope in at least 17 states, including unexpected places where heroin was all but unknown before they showed up. Have a good day, friends.